Once again, I've brought back the brightest bulbs that I know to talk about robots. I've got John and Scott in the room. Hey, John. Hey, Scott.
Howdy, howdy.
Randy. I'm not going to even bother to introduce you guys. I think everybody knows who you are now. And if they are unclear, they can look down in the information below. If you like me having John and Scott on, just hit the like button and that'll tell me bug these guys over and over and over again to just come back that much more often. All right. So, hey, all right. So I was sitting around, I'm thinking about the robot. I'm trying to figure out, where we are on the whole thing. And then I saw, John, you put up this video and you're talking about the Chat GPT aspect. And I thought, okay, that's an interesting subject. I need to get John and Scott back on here to talk about, because up till now, we've really been talking about how they move and whether it can do useful work and how it might be trained and all this kind of stuff. And then you threw another whole level of interest into the pie. So why don't you start there? How is Chat GPT going to move this thing along quicker?
Okay, so first of all, forgive the train if you heard it. You started up the thing and immediately a train went by. So this is all very speculative, of course. I don't have insight yet. Okay, so I just want people to not be like, oh, this is what Tesla's doing. This is like, I'm speculating on this. But what we have is, what's really come out of Chat GPT and these large language models is, and man, I've really been thinking about this recently, consciousness. And I hesitate to say that word, but let's just back it off a little bit. The ability to plan things out at a pretty abstract level and make sense of things. I mean, just Scott's example from a while back about doing the visual components poem, there's an awful lot of steps, abstract steps that happen before you even can set pen to paper or whatever, start typing on the screen. There's a whole bunch of planning that has to happen. And so that's an emergent property of these large language models. And one of the interesting aspects about driving is that if you're, as a human being, if you are driving well, the process could be happening pretty backgrounded in your head, but there's an awful lot of abstract planning and things. And to the extent that, my wife gets, she hates it because I'm constantly changing lanes, because in my mind, I'm always going, that lane's going to be a little faster. There's a truck in that lane. That person's driving a minivan, so they're not going to start fast. So I'm constant, that sort of thing. And I admit I'm a very, let's call it assertive driver, but it's those are like on micro levels, but there's also more macro levels where you can really start thinking ahead. For example, if we use full self-driving to go downtown, I was just before we started recording saying there's a thing called Twilight Athens today, and it's a huge festival. They shut down the downtown. There's traffic everywhere. There's a bike race in the evening. So how do you negotiate the longer term planning of like, where am I going to go? Where am I going to park the car? What time we're going to pick it up? What path are we going to take back home again? Because the normal paths are all clogged up because of street closings. So anywhere from like really, really some very small, second to second planning up to larger planning, like how are you going to negotiate a day's worth of driving? Those things all require a degree of abstraction that a human being would employ their mental capabilities to access. And that's the kind of thing that large language models like Chat GPT seem to be able to employ. So it's a really interesting thing. You can start thinking about, Tesla is already using these for lane guidance. John Emmons told us that last fall. So what else might they be using it for at this point? They just did the 11.6 release notes, and a lot of them had to do with what I call midterm planning, that 20 to 30 second range, where it has to, and it's always been its Achilles heel. That's where it fails for me all the time, because it doesn't set itself up for success by getting into the right lane, moving in the correct way, inserting itself between traffic where it needs to, things like that. That has been missing. And that's where something like, a large language model type planning could really come in. All right, I've talked enough. Scott wants to jump in, I can tell.
No, I agree that pretty much what Randy was saying earlier is that it's going to be about the software. I mean, the robots has never really been that much about the mechanics. It's always been about how do you program them and improving that. So we can fiddle with the mechanics as much as we want, but if we have a really good brain, that is the game changer. That's what changes everything. And again, it definitely comes down to planning. And that is definitely the way we look at it abstractly. We try to figure out what the whole process is we want to go through. We break it down in different steps. And I've already seen full self-driving do a few things that impress me. And there's one more thing I would like to see it do. So where I live, it's very busy traffic, and it's very popular with bicycles, especially on the weekends. And so there's bike lanes going north and south, and there's still a lot of traffic that's along there. So you always have to look out for it. And I'm always trying to give them a lot of room. And the earlier versions of full self-driving seemed like it almost waited till it was to the cyclist and then would weave out of the way. It was like, that was ridiculous. There's almost like no point to it at that. But now what it will do is that when it sees a cyclist, it starts to veer over way earlier, right when I would do it, has no problem going over the center line a little bit, and then goes back in. So it feels very, very natural. And so it's doing that. It's like, wow, it's definitely much better at the VRUs and cyclists deciding what to do. But then it impressed me something even more the other day, is that it was approaching a cyclist and it wanted to get over, but there was still one car coming the other way. And it actually just like dropped back a little bit on the speed. It's like it just took its foot off the accelerator like you would, just waiting for it to go by. And then went by, and then it went around and went back up the normal speed and did it. And it's like, that's exactly how I would have done it. So it was playing with those two things. What it doesn't do yet, which I wish it would do, is that, like I said, there's cyclists on both sides. So sometimes I'm going down there, FSD is going down there, and I don't have a cyclist on my side, but there's cyclists on the others, and there's cars coming up that way. And I know what those cars are going to want to do. They're going to give way. And I just wish FSD would then look at that and then say, hey, I think I know what they're going to do. They're going to come over, anticipate that, make way for them, because cars are usually doing that for me, even if whether FSD is on or not. They see the cyclist, they kind of get the idea, they'll go a little bit more to the right just to give me that room to be able to go ahead and do it. So when you start seeing something like that, then you know it is really understanding the world quite well.
Yeah. And I think, to jump in, I know you want to talk about Optimus, and I know we're both talking about cars right now, and Optimus will take this to the next level. But what Scott is saying is right. And I wasn't explicit enough. When I started talking about consciousness, there's a model of mind that you project onto other, like I project onto you guys, you do it to me. But that thing that Scott's talking about, when you're on a side of the road without a cyclist, but there are cars coming the other direction and there are cyclists, you have a theory of mind, which is that person is going to want to get out of the way, and thus I should move over to the right-hand side of my lane to make it easier. And it's that sort of multiple level of abstraction, which requires a degree of consciousness on FSD's part, and that's where LLMs come in.
Yeah. And when I drove back from Starbase, you had like a lot of these different situations where I'm going along the highway and suddenly a truck decides to pull out to the left side for absolutely no reason. And at first, like, what's he doing that for? But then you think about it for a second, it's like, oh, the reason is because there's a vehicle stalled up there, or there's an emergency vehicle. So a lot of times you have to look at those things and anticipate, it's like, is he doing it just because he's being a jerk, or is it because there's something else? And then you go and then you begin to realize that. So again, it's state of mind, reading their actions and what it is, and realizing that, oh, he's giving me a strong signal that there's something I can't see because he's kind of blocking my view, and I might want to actually follow with him.
Boy, and this is so far ahead of what we were talking about, not the three of us, but just in general in the community, what we were talking about even a year ago. Right. I mean, even a year ago, I can remember thinking about, okay, you've got a pedestrian making a decision about crossing the street, and the FSD has to kind of view that pedestrian and make some decisions about whether he will actually step off and start moving, or whether he's going to stand there all day. Because if he stands there all day, the car is sitting there all day, and we've got a problem. So, but what you're talking about now with this idea of being able to really plan ahead and think through, and like you're saying, John, almost some level of consciousness that we might find as a level of consciousness. This is like such a leap, such a big leap in a year. And
again, just remember, like, I know Scott likes to sort of glibly say that the whole point of driving is to not interact with the world. But in reality, anything like that is a negotiation constantly. You're negotiating with pedestrians, with cyclists, with other people in cars, with expected traffic flow, things like that. It's always a negotiation. And the more intelligent the brain of this thing is, the better it's going to do at negotiating. And not that us humans are perfect either. I mean, that's why we get in accidents a lot of times, is somebody makes a dumb mistake and somebody else wasn't looking and There's normally
Right.
two proximate causes to an accident.
Yes. Sometimes the intent of someone else is not read quite right. And so that's why you have to be very careful with pedestrians. And we do see it's in many ways, overly cautious because
Yes.
they talk about they're using the kinematics of the VRUs to figure out what's going on. And I know that a lot of people kind of wonder what that is. And basically it's looking at the path it's taking and the path you're taking and predicting when they're going to cross and if they're going to cross, not just in space, but also in time. But it's a bit more complicated than that. And
Yeah.
John and I, we've kind of talked about, well, we should probably get into an episode where we actually talk about what, mathematically what's going on and what they can do about that. Because it's not just as easy as taking two lines and crossing them, but looking at how that trajectory might be evolving or changing over time to give you a hint that like, oh no, they're not really crossing. Because I get these suicide cyclists all the time that are coming at 90 degrees to the direction of the car because they're coming down a side street and then are just turning right into a bike lane. So if you see there's a bike lane there and everything else, you can surmise that, oh, they're probably going to go on the bike, but you still want to be sure. I'll take my foot off the accelerator.
Yeah.
Because FSD will do more than that. It'll actually slow down really hard because it doesn't trust what the cyclist is doing.
Right.
So there's some other things you can be doing at looking at, well, is he slightly slowing down or is he accelerating? Can I notice that there's some deviation in the path? Is it saying straight or is there a little bit of curvature? So depending upon how well they can read that, they might be able to say, okay, we think it's doing that. But we as humans, I don't think we are taking second and third derivatives to figure that thing out. We somehow innately are able to sense that. And some of it is like,
can I throw in, I think that one thing that's important, and I don't know that the car can do this at this point, but it would be good if and when it can, is we also look at people's heads. If the person turns and looks at us and makes eye contact or close enough with the car, we're like, they're communicating with us. Then there's also the looking at your screen and stepping out into traffic. Then you're like, well, they're really oblivious, so I better be extra careful. And so if you see a cyclist and they're coming at 90 degrees, but they're also looking at you, the odds are that they're thinking, I'm going to make this turn, because they're not that stupid that they're not going to look at you and just go straight. If on the other hand, they're like looking at the sky or something, you're going to be a lot more conscious. So there's even reading the whole head face area is critically important.
It's the body language. And that's something that FSD will have to pick up on along with what they are calling the kinematics.
And I know Lex Friedman has worked on that in the past. I'm not positive he's working on that now, but I know he does a lot of work with emotion and facial recognition. So, yeah.
So now how does large language model fit into this entire thing? Staying on FSD or talking about the bot, either way. So do we actually feed content in through language that helps it to think about body language, to think about, to say, be aware of the fact that the pedestrian is going to look at you and give you signals. I mean, how does that large language model aspect work?
I think you're on the right track. I mean, I think it's all data. If they can provide it with many, many, many examples, including simulated ones of a site, Scott's is a good example, the 90-degree thing, and you're making a turn into a bike lane. And if there's a bunch of examples of people not looking at you and making the turn, or not looking at you and going straight across, or looking at you and you feed it 10,000, 100,000 of these different instances and into something that is analogous to a large language model, a transformer-based vision system. And then hopefully it'll just learn. It'll be like, I don't know how humans learn. We just sort of know. We look and we're like, yeah, that person's not going to step off the curb because of the way that they're acting right now. So it's not just down to kinematics. It's down to like the way that we're judging that person.
Right. So you need a lot of data, but the question is, how easy is it to get that kind of data of people just going into the street and everything else? The sample size is pretty small. And so you can talk about, you need to simulate it, or you may have a lot of these things with test tracks where they're sending people out, the dummies that are moving along. The problem with the simulation, John, is I'm afraid you're going to teach it to read body language based on the uncanny valley. and I just don't think you can read emotion that well. Right. So you're going to have to come up with a simulator that really is able to give the nuance of what it's like to look someone in the eye. What are the expressions? What are the head fakes? What are all the other little things that are going on that we pick up on? So if we teach it with the simulation data, I'm not sure.
Well, let's back up. I mean, you can certainly animate something that will do all of those steps, but that's also very arduous. Currently, it requires a human being to spend a great deal of time making that functional.
Yeah.
that's not scalable. So the question is, so I mean, it really comes back to most simulations these days. Like even if you look at Tesla simulations, the ones that they've shown us in Unreal Engine, it's just cars and people are just kind of walking.
It's a video game.
Yeah, it's a video game. They're not behaving as a normal human would. So you're not going to get that nuance. So if it's going to be done in simulation, it's going to have to be very, very based on data that they do have. And huge advantage. We just found out Tesla's getting 1 million miles of FSD and 120 million miles of driving per day. So, you know, even if FSD is not engaged, every time Scott deals with a bike that comes like that, that's another data point that they can flag and they can go look at. And then they can build simulations off of that, right? Hopefully relatively accurate ones.
Yeah, maybe something like Midjourney would be able to do a much better job of making the characters actually look realistic to give the kind of the expressions and nuance on there. So there is like your normal kind of animation where you can only get it to a certain level that we all know doesn't look realistic. But if it might be that AI is actually able to help us train the AI by giving us, you know, the kind of models that you would be looking at to understand it. And I've always said that there is a huge advantage to doing simulation because they've had a problem with auto labeling. And, you know, because there's a human in the loop and you don't know what no one knows what the answer is. How many cars are there? Well, the auto labeler might say that there's 15 cars and the human might say there's 13, but it might be there's actually 16 because they're both missing out on something. So none of them ever know the answer. So the AI, when we score it on the fact that we have to take the test too when we're failing the test and getting things wrong. What's nice about having a simulation is you're omnipotent. You already know what the labels are on everything. So you can come up with every absolute example you want, and then you put it in there and then you score it and you say, nope, you missed that trash can over there, or you missed that fire hydrant, or you missed that dog that's supposed to be over here. And so you can go through again and again and keep on doing it until it gets it right. So I think there's only so much you can do with real data. And then when you go into simulation data, you can go a lot better because you have the answer key right from the beginning. You don't have to guess what the answer key is.
Right. No, in the case of I'm going to forget his name all of a sudden. What's wrong with me? The famous left turn. Chuck's left turn. In the case of Chuck Smith's left turn, they decided to actually send out a bunch of drivers to take that left turn over and over again. Do you think they're doing that frequently, or do you think that was a one-off?
As far as I know, that, you know, to that scale, it might be a one-off, but I'm sure there's a lot of other interesting situations that they've had to go over again and again to understand the nuance.
Right.
Put a real test driver out there and try it over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, we have to look at the fact that those cars existed. There were multiple cars that had many, many sensors on them, which means that they obviously have engineers that go out and do that. Yeah. You know, it wasn't like they just cobbled something together. The car had been built for that purpose. So I would imagine perhaps less famously, but, you know, if there was another instance where they're like that specific, whatever it is something that we need to deal with, that they could, you know, they just have these guys on call and they just drive and go do it. And probably a lot of times nobody notices. You know, it's just a black Tesla out there that's driving around. So it's not like it's going to be like super noticeable.
Yeah, because I always feel like it's the pedestrians, the scooters, the bicycles that represent the worst edge cases, especially at speed. So you guys have some beach cities. I have, you know, I'm here in Los Angeles, and you know, you're driving along the beach on a busy Sunday day. You have got everything jutting out. You've got
surfboards,
surfboards pulling out, you know, scooters, people walking, people running. I mean, every kind of thing you can possibly think of going down Pacific Coast Highway, and you're going 35, 40 maybe, you know, and you're only feet away. So
and you're white knuckling it the whole time because you don't know what they're going to do next. Yeah.
So it seemed like those kind of situations would be good to do some of that as well.
Yeah.
If we switch this to robots, again, only a few months ago, the three of us, were talking about, you know, how the robot might negotiate in real space as a cobot dealing with other humans in a space, dealing with or the robots in a space. So now, switching that conversation we just had, it sounds like using large language models, you could really teach it to be a cobot a lot faster at a lot more sophisticated level.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can start with as Scott says, the strawberry fields, the fruit that's so low it's on the ground, which is basically just throwing a large language model on top of it as an interface so that you can say, hey, Optimus, go do this for me. And it's able to process that. And then it's able to respond in natural language. So that's the like, that's the like, duh, this is like super obvious thing that you just add on top of that. But that's more or less, that's like kind of too easy in a way. It's more interesting what happens underneath that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we already have the example today in our car. It's very simple. You can push the button and you can say, navigate me to the supermarket. Right. That's it. And then the car is going to sit there and think about, okay, so there's a destination. Now, how do I get to the next destination? And it breaks it down into all the different steps. And then it starts executing them one at a time. Right. And that's all Optimus is going to do. You're going to give it something like, clean up this room or something like that. And then it's going to break down the steps. Okay. What is the room? Oh, so we were talking about the room that I'm in, right? It's a definite article. So it's already going to know we're talking about this room as opposed to a room, which is like, well, which room? So it might kind of come back to you and ask you which one it is. So, okay, you said the room. So it's going to look around and what is the normal state of the room and what are the objects that are the problem? And so then it's going to go around and start identifying all the different objects that probably shouldn't be there. And then it's going to say, oh, okay, where do these objects belong? And then it's going to go and start picking them up. It's going to notice, oh, there's some socks and some underwear. So that's going to go over in the hamper. Let's bring that on over there.
I was thinking of Tesla's factory, and I was like, wait, there's socks over here somewhere. It's going to go back in the bookshelf,
So you're thinking about the factory, John?
Well, I was just saying, I was in my mind, I was imagining the factory room, and then Scott's like the socks and underwear, and I was like, "There's socks and underwear in a factory room. What is going on here?"
I just like to talk about it, but the factory, it'll be something else. You'll probably tell it something, some specific step. Whether it's going to be, mount this door on the car or something like that, and then it's going to have to break it down. But those steps are going to be more precise and a little bit trickier.
I love your idea of clean up the room. That requires a great degree of consciousness. And again, modeling of mind of someone else, because if your mom says to you, or you say to your child, depending on which end of the equation you're on, clean up your room, that means you have to know, as the person receiving that command, what is the state that is adequate to the person who's telling me? Like, some people clean up the room means throw their laundry in a hopper. For somebody else, it's like, you're going to vacuum the floor, you're going to, wipe down all the surfaces, make your bed. There are multiple states, and it depends on the person telling you. And so there is a model of mind that's involved.
Well, for me, it was shove all the stuff under the bed.
Well, yeah, okay.
Right. That was the way I did it. So that becomes, that becomes the other side of that question. And we do know, of course, Siri responds to us, and whatever the Amazon version of that responds to us in certain ways. But it would seem like with large language models, that responsiveness will be starting to improve. So for instance, the other day I was talking to, I was on Chat GPT, and I got into a political discussion with it. And I eventually told it that I thought it was I thought it was being biased. And it said, well, we have to end this conversation.
It told you that?
It told me.
It ended the conversation.
I was snippy with it, and it says we need. It had boundaries. What's with this? So I'm like, oh. So the bot could be like, no, Mom, I'm not going to clean the room right now, or I have other things to do.
This
are you sure that's what you want me to do right now?
Right. Well, this actually touches on something really interesting. Were you dealing with Chat GPT or with Bing? Because Bing is, okay, that's interesting. But my understanding is, and they've actually scored this, and this is something that OpenAI has talked about, that their unfiltered GPT-4, before they put all the guardrails on it, was significantly smarter than the guardrail version. So it scores higher on all these metrics, which means that putting these guardrails on actually makes it dumb or dumber than it would be otherwise. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and then we can get into Elon's Truth GPT or whatever the hell he's going to call it in X.AI. But I mean, I think so. There's the language interface, but the interesting part right now, if you want to talk to Siri or Alexa, You're like, you can give it a command. Like you can, I don't want to say that right now because it's going to set it, but you can say blank, set an alarm for 7 p.m. and it will set it. That's a simple command. It does it. You can't say, even if you had a physicalized version of this, you couldn't say to that, clean the room, because you would have to say, holy crap, the laundry list would be really big. You'd have to like break it down into every single command, go over there, reach down, pick this thing up, move over here, go over, it would take longer than doing it yourself. So that's the difference between what we currently have, which is just a simple command response, real basic thing, to something that's able to abstract out a much more complicated series of actions from a single command.
Right. And then there's the question whether it takes a certain amount of initiative when you do something. So it might be, just kind of pick up around here or tidy up. Then it goes through and then it discovers something like, there's a stain over here in the carpet. Either it will ask you, do you want me to take care of that? Or maybe it just goes ahead and does it itself.
Right.
But then you got to be careful, because then it might just start going like crazy and trying to you got to get out, you get the steam cleaner out here and all this other stuff. And then it looks around, hey, I think we need to paint the walls. And like,
you come home and there's just stuff everywhere because it's got all the different.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And and again, the question becomes, kind of based on what I had that conversation. I had another conversation with Chat GPT the other day where I asked it something and then I re-asked because it wasn't quite right. And finally, and then the third time I said, well, that wasn't exactly what I was looking for. I really wanted this. And it says, oh, I'm really sorry. Right. And it's like, I don't want my robot to be sorry, or do I?
You get the Canadian version.
Yeah. Actually watch Lex Friedman's. I'm pitching for Lex right now.
Yeah,
his recent interview with Max Tegmark is really good. And Max is all about, he's the one who started that whole pause AI for 6 months. And actually, when you listen to what he's saying, he's not an idiot. He's not like one of those people who's just like, we have to do this. He perfectly well understands how insanely complicated asking that to be done is. But he does talk about humbleness. Building humbleness into these things is in his mind, the solution. That you never, because the problem with something like Chat GPT is you can ask it a question in some way and it'll be like Neil Armstrong became, if you say, hey, what about Neil Armstrong as president of the United States? And it will give you a very confident history of him winning the election in 1976. And, it will tell you this stuff with great confidence. And he's saying that is not a good thing. What you really want is something going like, I'm taking a guess here. It's like the humbleness and the ability to continue to learn. I think when we deal with human beings, we find that too. The most annoying human beings, in fact, probably including us, are the ones that are the know-it-alls.
Yeah. So you mean Chat GPT suffers from the Mandela effect then?
Yeah.
So all right. So we then my original idea for this particular episode was to talk about whether the robot was going to be snippy with us. I mean, that's basically what it boils down to. And again, in a humble way, we might ask it to go over and drill some holes in a particular way, and it might think to itself, that's not the right way to do this, and respond to us and say, are you sure that's what you want me to do? I think you mean slightly to the left. Is that what we might be getting with this large language model opportunity that we're looking at?
I think what you're describing is basically Rosie the robot in the Jetsons, because she was pretty snippy, if I remember.
Yeah.
And making sure that what you're asking for is very, very precise, because you're right. You could give it a rather open command and it might interpret it a little bit different, and it's doing it correctly, or thinks it has a better idea as far as like, well, no, the holes have to be done this way. And, no, they don't. Or, maybe it really says that this is the better way to do it. You need that. So you do need a certain amount of supervision on everything, which I've seen is that Chat GPT will be very accurate in some things. And at other times it'll just be pure bluster. And you can tell it's like, it's making this stuff up and it thinks it's real. And so we have to be the guardrails in many cases. Yeah. So that's what I think with the robot, you have to make sure that when it's executing something, it really is doing it, and we don't end up in that paperclip factory kind of situation.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say the paperclip factory was what I was thinking about. So let's say you gave, worst case scenario, you have your Optimus sitting at home and you leave for work and you're like, I want this house spotless when I get back home. Mm-hmm. And you come back home and it has dismantled your house bit by bit and removed it. And so there's no spot left, so it can take you.
Or you come back and the dog is missing.
Your spouse, the kids, the dog, all of them are gone. It's like, wait a second.
No, the dog called Spot. Right?
There
you go. Cheers. but I think the paperclip, interestingly enough, who made I think it was that Eliezer. Anyway, he said that what he was talking about was that you were breaking it down anyway, he said that people are not understanding the paperclip factory correctly, but the basic understanding of it is that you tell a robot that you want to maximize, your objective is to maximize the number of paper clips that you produce. And what it does is it turns the entire world, Earth, including all people and everything, into paper clips, because it's like, I'm going to maximize it. So, that's the alignment problem. Yes. And I think that's what we're talking about right now is getting what humans are terrible at this. We will say we want something, and what we mean is not what we say. So I want the house spotless.
John, get me a Coke. Go get me a Coke. Yeah. You know what that means in New England? That can mean anything. It can mean get me an orange soda.
Right. Yeah. You have to say what kind of Coke. It's like, what kind of Coke?
Exactly. So what kind of Coke do you want? Yeah. What? I mean, Coke is Coke, right? No, you want an orange Coke? Grape Coke? Right.
But so it can have humorous consequences like that, but it can also have disastrous ones where, and that's assuming we're speaking the same language. When you introduce translations into everything gets very complicated very quickly.
Yeah. So all of these things are issues for all aspects of large language models and things like Chat GPT and whatnot. Do you think it's any more significant? I guess it would be more significant with a robot because the robot does have the capability of acting in space, actually creating or destroying things that are around it. Right.
If you want to go to that old cliche that the pen is mightier than the sword, we could, if you take a hypothetical, so we get to the next presidential election, right? And someone turns loose the AIs, and we end up with a battle of the AIs producing massive amounts of misinformation that's targeted psychologically. Because again, with a model of mind, you can know what's going to work with people. We're not that complicated. It's pretty easy to figure out how to game us. Statistically, not every single person, but that could have massive effects on the world.
It's create a little bit of panic because I'm still trying to understand. In South Florida this week, there were gas shortages there, and it's not clear whether there was gas shortage or if it was just panic buying. The same thing that happened with the toilet paper is the problem was that everyone bought up all the toilet paper, and that just kind of made the situation worse. And I think it started in Australia, and then people started reporting it out, and then people just started going. So I'm sure a sophisticated AI could figure out how to play people very easily by just kind of starting something. And that's kind of the theory behind chaos, is that something very small can then be easily created into something very, very big if you just understand what is the correct seed and what you just have to push. So a little bit of energy, something in the right place, and things are just going to take off.
Yeah, hacking and fraud. Brian Wong sent me a little note the other day and said one of the biggest issues that we're going to be facing in the next 6 months, 12 months with all this open AI stuff is going to be hacking and fraud. Phishing is going to take on a whole. I mean, these guys are going to send you emails that look so legit that you're not even going to question it. And, most of us are like, oh, I'm too smart to get phished. But if you get something that looks real enough, it doesn't have to affect everyone, even if it's only like 1% of the people who receive it. That's your life savings emails.
Are easy because there's grammatical mistakes in there. They don't actually know your name. They just kind of make something up, and like you can kind of tell. But if they start going in there and are really able to convince you that this is an order that you placed, that the name and everything is right, and enough little things in there, and that's the social engineering aspect of it, which they would probably be able to do, is go into your profiles. You have to be very, very careful.
Yeah. And let's also realize that you can then take the successful and non-successful, you can A/B test the hell out of this, and you can keep refining and refining and refining until it gets damn good. Right. So if you just take something simple like an email, the Nigerian prince email, but something, a more modern version of that, you send out 1,000 different versions of it. 3 of them work. You then take those and you manipulate those and resend them out again in 1,000 versions. And you keep taking the top 3. And genetic algorithm wise, you're going to hone in on what works. And that is damn scary.
But probably the worst thing will be when it's able to take a target and run some sort of profile on the target to get as much information about it. Because right now they know a little bit. So they might try to guess your name from your email or something like that, which is why it's a good idea to have an email that looks like just a jumble of letters. So there could be other aspects of it. And if they can start getting more and more information, checking your social media, everything else, they can convince you. And of course, that's going to be the problem with, I think you have that situation where people are calling up a relative, asking for money or something like that, and taking advantage of them. And if they know enough about you, they could convince you that, oh, that really is my grandson in trouble. And, oh, yeah, I think he was going on a trip here. And easily convince people. So that's what especially if they can get the voice down. It's like you're on there. It's like, it sounds exactly like them.
Yeah, and what do they need now? 3 seconds of voice or something, 4 seconds of voice.
Yeah.
They can hit you.
We better shut up.
It's too late for us.
Did you see the Joe Rogan? What do you call it? The Joe Rogan fake?
No.
Oh yeah, they did a intentionally. I mean, not to try to fool anybody. Just as a YouTube video, they did a Joe Rogan, and I mean, you cannot tell. Wow. It is Joe Rogan.
like visually too, not just voice.
Visually, the visual was not as good as the voice, but the voice was amazing. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Everybody buckle up. It's going to don't lose your life savings here, people.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. If you're not following John on Patreon, you need to follow him on Patreon, and me too. And all 3 of us on Twitter. And then John and Scott both have a great video channel. So please also follow them there. All of that will be in the information below. And let's see, what else have I left anything? Oh yeah, of course you need to hit the like button if you like these guys. I don't know why you would, but I do. So maybe you will. Anyway, thanks again. And it's been great talking to y'all.
Click the link below to get your paperback, Kindle, or audiobook now.